The day my husband learned I had a chronic illness, he held my hand and said, "We'll get through this together." A week later, he moved out and sent me a message that read, "I didn't sign up to be a nurse." Months passed, and one day, he showed up at my door, crying, "I made a mistake." I smiled, held up my engagement ring, and whispered, "So did I." Then I shut the door. I met Daniel when I was 26. We were both fresh out of college, working our first real jobs in the city, him in finance, me in marketing. We clicked instantly. He was charming, confident, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and own it without trying. I was quieter, more observant, but something about him made me feel seen. Like I mattered. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. It was a picture-perfect moment. A rooftop dinner, the city skyline glowing behind him, a diamond ring sparkling in the candlelight. I said yes without hesitation. I thought I'd found my person. For the first few years, our marriage was good. We traveled, we laughed, we built a life together. Of course, there were small cracks, his tendency to be a little selfish, his impatience when things didn't go his way, but I ignored them. Love was about compromise, right? Then, last year, everything changed. It started small. A dull ache in my joints, a persistent fatigue that coffee couldn't fix. I brushed it off as stress. But then the pain got worse. Some days, getting out of bed felt impossible. I'd wake up exhausted, my body stiff and aching like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I saw doctor after doctor, each one more puzzled than the last. Finally, after months of tests, I got my diagnosis, an autoimmune disorder. A chronic illness. No cure, just management. Some days would be good, others unbearable. I was scared. No, I was terrified. But when I told Daniel, he took my hands in his, looked me in the eyes and said, "We'll get through this together." And I believed him. For a few days, he seemed supportive. He brought me tea, asked how I was feeling, even looked up my condition online. But something was off. He started coming home late, barely speaking to me. I told myself he just needed time to process, that he'd adjust. Then, one morning, I woke up and he was gone. At first, I thought he'd just left for work early. But then I saw the note on the kitchen counter. Not even a handwritten one, just a text message on my phone. I didn't sign up to be a nurse. That was it. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a clean, effortless exit from the life we had built together. I sat there for hours, staring at those words, unable to process what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, the truth came out. Daniel had moved into a luxury high-rise apartment across the city. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't grieving. He was thriving, going to bars, traveling, living his best single life while I was stuck in bed, trying to figure out how to live with a body that had betrayed me. His parents, who had once treated me like family, completely cut me off. His friends? Silent. It was like I had never existed. But here's the thing about being abandoned at your weakest. You either let it destroy you, or you use it as fuel. I chose the latter. I poured every ounce of my pain into rebuilding myself. I found a specialist who actually listened. I adjusted my diet, my lifestyle, everything. It wasn't easy. Some days I still felt like a prisoner in my own body. But I refused to let it define me. And then, just as I was starting to feel like myself again, Daniel came back. It was a rainy evening when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was a delivery. But when I opened the door, there he was, soaking wet, disheveled, eyes red and swollen. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, waiting. "I made a mistake," he choked out. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. "But I miss you. I miss us." I let his words sink in. The old me, the woman who once adored him, might have believed him. Might have given him another chance. But that woman was gone. Instead, I held up my engagement ring, the one I had kept in a small box tucked away in my drawer. I looked him in the eyes, smiled, and whispered, "So did I." Then, without another word, I shut the door. And this time, it was my turn to walk away. He stood outside my door, knocking, calling my name, begging me to talk. I didn't. For a long time, I just stood on the other side, listening. His voice cracked. He said he loved me. He said he regretted everything. He said he wasn't the same man who walked away. I almost laughed. He wasn't the same? Good. Neither was I. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The silence stretched. I peeked through the window and saw him standing there, shoulders hunched, rain dripping from his hair. He looked pathetic. But I didn't feel sorry for him. I thought that was the end of it. That he'd crawl back to whatever perfect, healthy, stress-free woman he had lined up next. I was wrong. A few days later, it started with small things. A text message I ignored. Then another. "Please, just hear me out. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I need to explain. I still love you." Each one chipped away at my peace, not because I believed him, but because I knew who he was. Daniel wasn't used to losing. He walked away on his terms, and now he wanted control back. I stayed silent. Then, one afternoon, I got home from a doctor's appointment and saw a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. Expensive ones, red roses, white lilies. The kind of arrangement that would have made me melt years ago. There was a note attached. I'll wait as long as it takes. I should have been angry. I should have thrown the flowers away. But instead, I laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh. Because the same man who had said I didn't sign up to be a nurse was now suddenly the picture of devotion. The same man who ran when I needed him most was now standing outside my life, begging to be let back in. It was pathetic. But then things got strange. The messages weren't just from him anymore at first, it was just Daniel. Then I started getting messages from his mother. Daniel is really struggling. He knows he messed up. Can't you at least talk to him? I ignored it. Then, a friend we used to share, one of the few who had conveniently disappeared when I got sick, suddenly popped back into my inbox. Hey, I don't know what happened, but Daniel seems really broken up about you. Maybe he deserves a second chance. I blocked them. And then, his father called me. That one, I answered. Because out of all of them, his father was the only one who had ever seen through Daniel's bullshit. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told me everything, his father said, voice tight. I raised an idiot. I sighed. I don't care. I know. And I don't blame you. There was a long pause. Then, but I think you should know something. My stomach twisted. What? He didn't just leave you. His father's voice was lower now, like he didn't want anyone to hear. There was someone else. Everything inside me went still. What? He didn't want to tell you, but you deserve to know. When he left, he wasn't alone. He moved in with someone. A woman. The room felt smaller. My grip on the phone tightened. And? My voice was eerily calm. And she left him. His father sighed. Apparently, it wasn't what he thought it would be. She got tired of him. Kicked him out. Now he's realizing what he lost. I let the words sink in. So that was it. Daniel hadn't just walked away, he'd run straight into another woman's arms. And when that fell apart, he had come crawling back to me. I felt sick. Not because I still loved him, because I didn't, but because of the sheer audacity of it. He hadn't come back because he missed me. He'd come back because he was alone. Because I was the safe option. Because I had been his backup plan all along. I took a slow breath and let it out. Thanks for telling me. His father hesitated. You're not going to take him back, are you? I almost laughed. Not in this lifetime. He let out a relieved chuckle. Good. I'd hate to have to disown my own son. We hung up. I stood in my quiet apartment, staring at the pathetic, wilted flowers on my table and felt nothing but disgust. Daniel wanted forgiveness. But what he really deserved was to feel exactly what I had felt, abandoned, alone, and completely insignificant. So I picked up my phone, scrolled to his name, and finally, sent a message. Come over. We need to talk. And just like that, the real revenge began. I expected him to look desperate, maybe hopeful. Instead, he looked smug. Like he had already won. Like I had just proven his point, that no matter how angry I was, no matter what he did, I would always take him back. That's when I knew. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't here because he regretted leaving. He was here because he thought he could manipulate his way back in. I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked in like he belonged here, like he hadn't abandoned me when I needed him most. I could smell his cologne, expensive, familiar. I hated that I used to love it. He sat down on my couch, rubbing his hands together like he was nervous, but his eyes gave him away. He thought he had already won. I sat across from him, arms crossed. Talk. He exhaled dramatically, shaking his head. I was an idiot. His voice was soft, like he was playing some romantic role. I was selfish and I hurt you. But I swear I've changed. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize now that I made the biggest mistake of my life. I tilted my head. You realize now? He nodded. I was scared. I freaked out. I thought I wasn't strong enough to handle this, but you weren't alone, were you? I cut him off. His whole body stiffened. There it was. The slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers curled into his palms. I smiled, slow and sharp. You moved in with her, didn't you? His mouth opened, closed. He looked caught, like a deer in headlights. Your father told me. I didn't give him time to lie. So, tell me, Daniel. Did you realize you made a mistake before or after she kicked you out? His face paled. That's when I saw it. The first crack in his little performance. I had him. He tried to recover, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't like that. No. I raised an eyebrow. Then tell me, what was it like? Silence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. See, I think I have it figured out. You left because you thought you could do better. You didn't want to be a nurse, so you ran straight into someone else's bed. And when she got tired of you, when she realized what I already knew, you had nowhere else to go. His jaw clenched. That's not fair. I laughed, shaking my head. Fair? You want to talk about fair? He had the nerve to look offended. I loved you. I gave him a long, slow look. No, you loved what I gave you. His nostrils flared. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I cut him off again, standing up. I understand that you're not here because you love me. You're here because you have nowhere else to go. You thought I'd still be the same woman who would forgive you, who would take you back and pretend none of this happened. I walked over to him, standing close enough that he had to look up at me. But I'm not that woman anymore. His hands curled into fists. I could see the frustration creeping in, the realization that this wasn't going to go the way he planned. Then he made a mistake. He sneered. You're not exactly a catch anymore. I felt the words hit, but instead of pain, there was only a cold, calm satisfaction. Because there he was. The real Daniel. The one who had been hiding behind fake tears and soft words. I smiled. And yet, you're still here. What does that say about you? His sneer faltered. I leaned down, lowering my voice. Get out. He didn't move at first. He just sat there, like he couldn't believe this was happening. I straightened up and walked to the door, opening it wide. Get out! For a second, I thought he'd argue. I thought he'd say something cruel, try to hurt me one last time. But instead, he stood up stiffly, his face carefully blank. He walked past me, stepping out into the hallway. I expected him to leave. But as soon as he was outside, he turned, his expression dark. You'll regret this. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Funny. That's exactly what I said the day I married you. Then I shut the door in his face. I locked it. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. But Daniel wasn't done. Not even close. For the next few weeks, he made it his mission to make my life miserable. First, it was the constant texts and calls. Apologies turned to accusations. You're being childish. Then guilt trips. I did love you. And finally, threats disguised as concern. You're sick. You think you can handle this alone. I ignored him. Then came the mutual friends. People who hadn't so much as checked on me when I was struggling suddenly had a lot to say. You should at least hear him out. He made a mistake, but aren't you being a little cold? Cold. Because I refused to welcome back the man who abandoned me. Because I didn't let him waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. I blocked them all. But Daniel wasn't the type to give up. The moment he realized he couldn't manipulate me back, he decided if he couldn't have me, he'd ruin me. And that's when things got ugly. The smear campaign at first, I didn't notice. But then my coworkers started acting weird. The polite small talk was replaced with awkward silences. My boss, who had always been kind, suddenly started watching me. Then, one morning, I walked into work and saw two coworkers whispering. The moment they noticed me, they stopped. I should have let it go. But something in their expressions, the mix of pity and unease, made my stomach turn. I pulled aside my friend, Anna, one of the only people who had actually stuck by me. What's going on? She hesitated, then sighed. You should know. Daniel's been talking. Talking? My voice was cold. She looked uncomfortable. He told people you're exaggerating your illness. That you've always had a victim mentality. I felt the blood drain from my face. He what? He said he tried to help you, but you pushed him away. That he left because he couldn't take the emotional abuse anymore. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of it. Daniel, the man who had left me in the middle of my worst days, was now painting himself as the victim? And worse? People believed him. I took a slow breath, forcing down the rage clawing its way up my throat. And you? Do you believe him? She gave me a sad smile. I know who you are. And I know who he is. I nodded, my hands tightening into fists. Good. Because if Daniel wanted a war, I would give him one. The confrontation I waited. I let him think I was beaten, that I was licking my wounds in silence. And then I made my move. I knew exactly where to find him, his favorite bar, the one he took me to when he wanted to impress his colleagues. He'd be there, playing the part of the wounded, devoted ex-husband. I walked in, head held high. The moment his eyes met mine, he froze. The people around him noticed. The bar went silent. Perfect. I walked right up to him, ignoring the whispers. Daniel. My voice was light, almost amused. You've been busy. He recovered quickly, giving me a fake, sympathetic smile. I was just telling them how hard this has been for both of us. I let out a soft laugh. Right. And did you also tell them about the woman you left me for? The one who kicked you out the second she saw through your bullshit. His face turned red. Or how about the fact that the second you had nowhere else to go, you came crawling back? I turned to the group, making sure to look every single one of them in the eye. You want to know why he's really here? It's not because he regrets leaving. It's because he got rejected. Twice. A few of them exchanged glances. The doubt started creeping in. I leaned in close, my voice dropping. And just so we're clear, my illness? It's real. But do you know what's not? Daniel's version of events. Silence. Daniel's jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. I could see the moment the facade cracked, the mask slipping away. Then, in a low, venomous voice, he spat out, "You're pathetic." I smiled. Maybe. But at least I don't have to lie to make people feel sorry for me. And with that, I turned and walked away. The fallout was delicious. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. People started questioning Daniel's story. Those same mutual friends who had defended him? They went silent. His coworkers heard about the confrontation. His reputation took a hit. And Daniel? He lost. Not just me, but the image he had tried so hard to protect. One night, weeks later, I got a final text from him. "You really ruined my life." I stared at it for a long moment. Then, finally, I replied, "No, Daniel. You did that all on your own." And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.